At 87, I thought desire had abandoned me forever, until he touched my hand and reminded me I was still alive. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to this channel, tap that like button, and drop a comment telling us which city you're tuning in from. It truly means the world to us. Now, settle in and enjoy the story. People often say that once you reach a certain age, the surprises stop coming. You wake each morning knowing exactly how the day will unfold. You brew your coffee the same way you have for decades. You watch the sunlight trace its familiar path across walls that have witnessed more of your life than any living person. My name is Eleanor, and I have called this modest cottage on Oak Street my home for nearly 45 years. The ancient oak tree standing guard in my front yard has survived countless storms, outlasted several mailboxes, and watched generations of families come and go from the houses around me. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I had my routines, my small comforts, my predictable patterns that kept the chaos of the world at bay. Tuesdays meant laundry. It had always meant laundry ever since my husband passed, and I took over every task that had once been shared. There was something grounding about routine, something that made the emptiness feel less vast. But that afternoon, my faithful dryer decided it had served long enough. The first warning came as a grinding sound, like metal protesting against metal. Then came a violent shudder that rattled the whole utility closet. Finally, silence. Complete, stubborn silence. I stood there clutching a basket of damp towels, breathing out a sigh that came from somewhere deep in my bones. Machines, much like people, eventually reach a point where they simply refuse to cooperate any longer. The difference is that machines tend to leak water all over your floor when they give up. I attempted the obvious solutions. I unplugged it, waited, plugged it back in. I gave it a hopeful slap on its side, the way you might nudge a sleeping friend. Nothing. The dryer remained determinately dead. I lowered myself onto the edge of the laundry basket and surveyed the situation. On the wall hung a small calendar featuring a watercolor painting of a coastal lighthouse. I stared at it without really seeing it, thinking about how strange it was that such a small disruption could feel so monumental when you lived alone. That was when my thoughts drifted to David. David was the son of my next-door neighbor, Margaret. He had returned to live with her several months earlier after what I gathered was some significant upheaval in his personal life. I never pried into the details. At my age, you learn that everyone carries stories they are not ready to share, and pushing only makes people retreat further into themselves. He was somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of face that suggested he still believed in handwritten letters and holding doors open for strangers. We had exchanged pleasantries over the low hedge separating our properties. I had watched him carry grocery bags for his mother, repair a wobbly railing on her porch, and wave cheerfully whenever he spotted me tending to my flower beds. He struck me as steady. Steady is a quality you come to treasure deeply when life has shown you just how rare and precious it truly is. I wrestled with myself for several minutes. I despise being a burden. I have always prided myself on managing my own affairs, solving my own problems, maintaining my independence even when the world seemed designed to strip it away from the elderly. But I also despise the thought of wet towels mildewing and my carefully maintained schedule falling apart. So I pulled on my favorite cardigan, the one with the soft buttons that my daughter had given me years ago, and walked the short distance to Margaret's front door. I knocked twice, then waited, then knocked once more in case the television had swallowed the first attempt. David answered with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased rather than merely polite. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said warmly, "everything all right over there?" "I certainly hope so," I replied, managing a small laugh. My dryer seems to have decided on early retirement without consulting me first. I wondered if you might be willing to take a look, but only if you have time to spare. He was already reaching for his jacket. Absolutely. Let me grab my tools. We walked back to my cottage together, and I noticed how unusually still the afternoon had become. The kind of stillness that makes you hyper-aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat, your own thoughts keeping pace beside you. He carried his toolbox with the confident grip of someone who trusted in his ability to solve problems, and I found unexpected comfort in that simple observation. Inside my utility closet, He knelt before the dryer like a physician examining a patient. He asked me to describe what had happened, and I recounted the whole small drama as if it were a story worth telling. He listened with genuine attention, nodding at the appropriate moments, his brow furrowed in concentration. Could be the heating element, he murmured, unscrewing the back panel. Or maybe a worn belt. Let's find out. I lingered in the doorway, suddenly feeling like a visitor in my own home. He worked methodically, pausing occasionally to explain what he was examining, even though I had not asked for explanations. I appreciated that more than I could express. It made me feel included in my own rescue rather than merely observing it. As he worked, conversation flowed naturally between us. We discussed the unpredictable weather first, then moved to the oak tree that dominated my yard, then somehow wandered into territory about how long I had lived on this street and how his mother used to come over to borrow eggs when he was just a little boy. He chuckled at that memory, and I found myself recalling a scrawny child with perpetually dirty knees and boundless energy, always running somewhere, always in motion. Time has a peculiar talent for preserving the essence of a person while completely transforming their exterior. After a while, he sat back and nodded with satisfaction.
Found it, he announced.
The belt slipped out of position. Happens more often than you'd think. Give me another minute. I fetched him a glass of cold water from the kitchen, and when I handed it to him, he thanked me as if I had offered something truly valuable. That struck me. At my age, you become acutely aware of who expresses genuine gratitude and who merely goes through the motions. When he finally stood, wiping his hands on a cloth, there was something different in his expression. Not dramatically different, just more present somehow, more fully there in the moment with me.
Try it now, he said.
I pressed the button. The dryer hummed to life, spinning faithfully as if nothing had ever been wrong. A ridiculous wave of triumph washed over me, completely disproportionate to the actual event. You are wonderful, I said, meaning it entirely. He shrugged with genuine modesty. Simple repair. Lucky it wasn't anything serious. We stood there together for a moment, listening to the machine do its work. The small room seemed to hold its breath around us. Something had shifted, though I could not have articulated what or how. Thank you, I said again, more quietly this time. This means more to me than you might realize. He looked at me then, really looked at me, not through me the way so many people look at the elderly, as if we were merely obstacles between them and their destinations. He saw me as a person, complete and present. I'm glad I could help, Eleanor, he said, using my name without the formal title, and somehow it did not feel presumptuous. It felt honest. It felt like acknowledgement. I walked him to the front door, and as he slipped on his shoes, I found myself saying that he was welcome to stop by for coffee sometime. He said he would enjoy that. Neither of us pretended it was just empty courtesy. After he left, I stood alone in my quiet cottage listening to the steady rhythm of the dryer. It sounded different now, like it was keeping time for something I had not previously noticed, something waiting patiently beneath the surface of my ordinary days. I could not pinpoint exactly when the change had occurred. Perhaps it was when he knocked on my door. Perhaps it was when the dryer whirred back to life. Or perhaps something had been quietly gathering for a long time, waiting for the smallest excuse to reveal itself. That evening, I opened the small journal I keep for thoughts too precious to risk losing. I wrote carefully. Today, something ordinary was repaired. Something else, I believe, has just begun to unfold. The following morning, I woke earlier than my body typically permits, the way you do when your mind has already decided that the day ahead will be significant. My cottage was wrapped in that soft blue-gray quiet that arrives just before dawn breaks fully. I brewed my coffee, stood by the window, and watched the oak tree stretch its shadow across the street like an old friend reaching out in greeting. Everything looked precisely the same as it had for decades. Yet something inside me felt subtly rearranged, as if invisible furniture had been shifted in the rooms of my heart. I lectured myself sternly. A neighbor had repaired an appliance. That was the entire story. Kindness does not always carry deeper meaning. At 87, you learn to keep your expectations firmly leashed because they have a tendency to run far faster than your aging body can follow. Still, I caught myself glancing toward the utility closet more than once, listening to the faithful hum of the dryer as if it were quietly keeping some secret promise meant only for me. Around mid-morning, I decided to bake. This decision was not entirely coincidental. I told myself the apples in my kitchen needed using before they went soft, but the truth was simpler and more vulnerable. I wanted a legitimate excuse to invite David over for the coffee I had mentioned. The pie emerged from the oven better than I had anticipated. The crust had cooperated beautifully, and my kitchen filled with that warm, sweet fragrance that transforms any house into something closer to a home. I set 2 cups on my small table by the window, then hesitated and added a third, in case Margaret wished to join us. The extra cup felt safer somehow, like armor against expectations I was not ready to examine. By 11, I had nearly convinced myself the whole idea was foolish. By 15:15, I was putting on my cardigan and walking next door anyway. This time Margaret answered my knock. She appeared a bit more fragile than I remembered, but her eyes remained sharp and welcoming. "Eleanor," she said, her face brightening. "Come in, come in." We settled in her living room and exchanged comfortable conversation about small matters. Her arthritis. My roses. The way seasons seem to accelerate when you are not paying attention. Then David emerged from the back of the house, drying his hands on a dish towel, and for a moment the 3 of us arranged ourselves like figures in a carefully composed photograph. "Perfect timing," I said, seizing my courage. "I baked a pie this morning and hoped you both might come over for coffee." Margaret laughed softly. "That sounds lovely, but I promised myself a rest after lunch. My body keeps stricter appointments than I do these days." She glanced at her son with a knowing look. "You go. Bring me back a slice later." He looked from her to me, hesitant. "If you're certain." "Completely certain," she said, already reaching for the blanket folded beside her chair. So David and I walked back to my cottage together, and the quiet between us felt different than it had the previous day. Not awkward in the slightest, just more attentive, more aware. We sat by my window where the light was strongest. It illuminated dust motes drifting through the air and revealed small imperfections in the paint that I had long since made peace with. He praised the pie with genuine appreciation, and I pretended my pleasure was not as deep as it truly was. Our conversation meandered through comfortable territory first. His work, which he described as being in transition, a word capacious enough to contain a multitude of unspoken stories. My years of teaching elementary school, and the strange sensation of having so much time now that no longer needs dividing into lessons and bells and schedules. We laughed about neighborhood memories, about families who had moved away, about houses that had changed color multiple times over the decades. Easy, warm laughter that felt like reconnecting with something I had forgotten I missed. Then a pause settled between us. Not uncomfortable, just spacious. A breathing room in the conversation. "I should thank you again," I said, stirring my coffee unnecessarily.
"For yesterday."
"Asking for help is not something I do easily." He nodded thoughtfully. "Offering help is not always simple either. But I'm glad you reached out." He looked at me with that same thoughtful expression from before, and I experienced the peculiar sensation that he was not seeing merely an elderly woman in a familiar house. He was seeing Eleanor. A complete person, not a category. "May I ask you something?" he said after a moment. "Of course." "Do you ever grow weary of being the capable one? The person who always manages everything on her own?" The question arrived gently, but it landed somewhere deep. I considered it carefully. "Yes," I admitted finally. "More often than I allow myself to acknowledge." He smiled, not with triumph, but with genuine understanding. "I think that's part of why I moved back home. I grew exhausted pretending I didn't need a place that remembered who I was, a place that didn't require constant explanation." We did not speak for several moments after that. The pie sat between us half-finished. The house itself seemed to be listening, its old walls absorbing our words like witnesses. I understood then that the shift I had been sensing was not really about him repairing my appliance. It was about being seen, truly seen, in a way that did not rush past me or through me. Later that afternoon, he offered to help me in the garden. I insisted it was unnecessary. He said he wanted to help anyway. So we spent hours together trimming rose bushes and pulling weeds from between the flagstones. The work was slow, and we were slow with it, and that slowness felt exactly right. At one point, I lost my balance slightly on the uneven ground. Before embarrassment could even register, his hand was there, steady and respectful, supporting my arm. Not pulling, not rushing, simply present. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," I said, and I meant something far larger than just my physical stability.